In your new book, Wasteland to Pureland, you mention that someone's career, sex, relationships and daily life can become their spiritual practice. What do you mean by that?
You first.
Well, nowadays, quite different from the millennia past, very few people are going to go to live in a convent or a monastery. However, there is a lot of interest in a spiritual life and what is a spiritual life and spiritual practice. In other words, we really need to make everything in our daily life an integral part of our spiritual practice for that very reason, that we're not necessarily going to become nuns and monks. So that's the fodder for our practice, the grist for the mill, and it can make for a very rewarding spiritual path.
I can't remember who said it, but somebody said, what you work with carries you to God. So basically, our careers, our relationships are where we spend most of our time. So working with these elements of the path leads us to our spirituality in terms of what we work with. So while in monasteries you would work in isolation, separated from the world, you would probably do a lot of the same things, but you'd be in a small community. Whereas in the world at large, you're doing the same kind of activities, but you're in a much bigger environment. So learning how to incorporate the world into your practice would be a big part of manifesting the realization, which is what the practice is for in the first place.
You say that Pureland is applicable to our changing modern world, and yet you also draw on ancient Buddhist philosophy. How do you integrate the two?
Go ahead.
Well, there's something in Buddhism called absolute truth and relative truth. And absolute truth is the spacious, radiant clarity of the awakened mind. And so Buddhism is really focused on that. The Buddhism is focused on how do you access it, how do you get there, what are philosophical underpinnings of that. But it just says nothing about what you do after you've experienced it. How do you go back into the world? How do you interact with the world? And the Buddha invented that as a monk, which became Buddhism. But in the relative world, the world where we all live and function and interact, there's the need for applicable methods and applicable strategies to integrate that practice into work and career and relationship. So that's the relative truth. So in that sense, we work with the relative truth as well, integrating how we live and work in the world with the fundamental understanding of what transcendence is.
There are the practices and the philosophy in Buddhism, they're 2,500 years old, but they still work. Well, but the reason they're still here is because they work, and we get that direct experience when we do the practice, and it happens just like it's described. We know for ourselves that it works. And yet, so there's this timeless truth to them that we want to take advantage of. And at the same time, obviously life is very different from how it was 2,500 years ago. So we need to adapt. We need to figure out how to make it more relevant in our contemporary lives. And figuring out how to do this is kind of part of the excitement of being a spiritual practitioner in this day and age.
You say that the way we make money can make us happy. And you also have a chapter on money, sex and power. What's the relationship between money and spiritual practice?
Ooh, it's a deep one. I'd say that most of us spiritual practitioners at some point in our lives make a kind of decision to not follow the status quo, which often involves I'm not just going to go get the best job I can. I'm not going to make the most money I can. I'm not going to just be a consumer. And that's an important part of the spiritual life, to make that choice. And we often throw the baby out with the bathwater and may find ourselves in a position where we can't afford to do retreats, or we can't afford to support our communities, our centers, our teachers, ourselves in the way that we'd like to and in the way that we need to thrive as spiritual practitioners. And it doesn't need to be this way. We can do both. And that's why we discuss how this works. And I think this is important. I would say that money is probably spiritual practitioners' shadow. And integrating this shadow is essential for us to have communities that thrive and a practice that thrives.
Well, money is a measuring system. It's how we measure things. We measure energy with ohms or volts, and we measure value with money. It's how we determine what something's worth. So insofar as money is a measuring system, it's also a value system. How do we value things? So if you were going to say, for instance, what a meal was worth to you in terms of, I don't know, 20 pounds, 10 pounds, whatever you spend, right? That kind of measures our relative value with it. So when it comes to the awakening, value also indicates energy. It's where's the energy's going, what's the energy involved with. So money and energy and value and measurement are all kind of in the same league. So we're saying that if you value spiritual awakening, if you value peace of mind, it should have a high monetary value. It should be worth a lot. So this idea of measuring is very key in our world in relationship to money. And our peace of mind is a high value measurement system in terms of awakening. So bringing the two together is central. So for this reason, you may have heard of koans, Zen riddles, sometimes called. So we invented this Zen koan that goes like, what measure measures, the measurers measure. And it's on that basis that we decide how we rate things and value things. And so money can be used as a measuring system for everything in our life, from a walk in the park to spiritual awakening to what we do with our day off to how we can pay for things in the economic world. So we need to talk about it, surely, I think. Don't you?
Surely.
Absolutely.
Called protecting against the hurt is the hurt. What do you mean by this? Could you explain?
Hurt is separation. Hurt is aloneness. When we get hurt, we shut down, we turn off, we become self-protected. Now, that's understandable. If a cat claws at my hand, I'm going to pull it away. It's going to hurt. I'm going to be very careful the next time I reach out to that cat. The cat has no intention of hurting me per se. He's or she is just protecting their territory, or we're startled or afraid or something. So humans in that sense aren't any different. When we get hurt, we tend to be afraid it's going to happen again, and we shut down and we self-protect. And now that we've shut down and self-protected, it becomes a habit, and we find ourselves shutting down and self-protecting when there's no immediate hurt in the environment. We habitualize it. So we learn to carry it with us wherever we go, even though we don't feel hurt. So we're protecting when we don't need to in the moment. So learning to let go of that hurt when it's unnecessary, which is 90% of the time, doesn't mean we're stupid or foul, that we're Pollyanna or something. It means we just get ready for it when you need it, and the rest of the time, relax, rather than carrying it all the time. What do you think?
I agree.
Do you?
And
that's wonderful.
I think as part of the self-healing process, after we've been hurt, we sort of nurse that hurt as part of our attempt to try to feel better, to try to heal. And sometimes that can become a habit where we're just nursing that hurt. And then that hurt becomes a part of our identity, where I'm the person that was hurt in such a way. And as Sensei said, we carry that hurt around with us then. And we really don't need to do that. And most of us, we don't want to do that. We don't want to be... I can be a radiant being of light, a cosmic being, or I can be the person that was hurt in such a way. And it's really our choice, and it's a choice that we make moment to moment. And it's way more fun to choose to be the radiant being of light.
I suppose I should just add that the protection against the hurt is habitualized, right? Because we learned it early. And so now we're going through our day and we don't feel hurt, but we're still carrying that pattern in our suspiciousness or our carefulness. Mm-hmm. And that is a dampening to the energy system. In a sense, you could say it's costing us money. If we go back to the previous question, protecting against the hurt when no hurt's present is like $100 or 150 pounds going out of your pocket every hour.
Out the window. Mm-hmm.
Because your energy system is in
Like
depression.
Yeah. Anticipating
it. It's hard on us.
Yeah, it is hard on us. And we don't need it.
Right. Pa.
Mindfulness and spirituality have become such popular topics. What makes Wasteland to Pureland different from other books in this genre?
good question.
That is a good question. Well, like the title indicates, Wasteland to Pureland is about the spiritual journey or the hero's journey from the wasteland, which is a life of suffering that we're all familiar with. It can just be the stress of everyday life, or some of us have significant traumas that we're recovering from. And how do we get from that suffering, that state of suffering, which is in Buddhism the first noble truth? Life is struggle. How do we get from this place of struggle and identifying with life is such a struggle to the Pure Land, a spiritual awakening, a life of bliss and love and wisdom? And so the book is about this process, this journey, and how we do it on a day-to-day basis, and how it's actually our struggle that becomes the fuel on the fire of our awakening.
Life is a complicated affair, and so most books on spirituality focus in on particular themes or particular subjects. And our book takes the approach of the topics touch all aspects of our life, from relationships to career, to the shadow, to creativity, to a vision for how we could live in community. So the book is quite wide-ranging, but always from the common theme of how to bring the awakening mind, the liberating mind, the peaceful heart into those different environments. So kind of a practical guide to how to do it in A, how to do it in B, how to do it in C, how to do it in D. And I think maybe that's perhaps the largest difference, is that it's kind of a more broad-range spectrum approach to awakening and its practice, compared to a lot of books which are kind of zoning in on a particular way.
We also discuss a lot the role of the shadow and how to integrate the shadow, which is very central to our teachings.
So we include a chapter, as you pointed out, on money, sex, and power, and the sexual politics, or the sexual dialogue in the community at large, the planetary community, is quite volatile at the moment, and we address an idea about how to have a discussion or a dialogue around that subject that is more integrative and perhaps more understanding in terms of the different factors. And I don't think most people have addressed that. For example, a fellow teacher in our lineage said, Sensei, Catherine, there are 12 books in this book. So I guess that's true. There's a lot of it's quite dense, I guess. It's not a long book, but it's full.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you to Watkins.